How easy do you think it's going to be for all these new construction sites to sell? No one's really launching their product because the demand has just dropped off a cliff. The cost of carrying is so high, everyone's broke. The cost of new construction just can't come down. Between the increase of development levies, the cost of construction, the cost of land. Oh, cost of land is coming down a little bit, but ultimately all that added up, you can't build cheaper than resale right now. So the cost of new construction is going to be super high. Add that with the HST or GST rebates from the federal, and then provincial, some of them are kicking PST. So in Ontario, we're doing that. So you get to save 13% on your new development build if you're going to turn it into a purpose-built rental. I think a lot more developers are going to turn these new condo sites that they normally would have sold to the public and have the public purchase them and then rent them out as landlords. We're going to see them turn into purpose-built rentals, I think. Anyway, what's going to happen when we have the student permits being capped? So stay tuned and let's talk about that in today's podcast.
Look, I get it. The Toronto real estate market is confusing. Whether you're a new or experienced investor or just looking for a home to raise your family in, join us at Broadview Table Talks as we sit around the table with my friends and talk about the real estate and the ever-changing market in Toronto.
Look, it's no secret that home ownership is really becoming unattainable right now for the average person. There's a study that came out from UBS, and they basically, it's a bank in, I think, Switzerland, and they basically said that you need to save 20 years for the average Ontario person to purchase a home. That's a lot. 20 years. I mean, you should be paying off your mortgage in 20 years, and how the heck is anybody going to do that? If you look at the average price of a home in Toronto, in the GTA, we're looking at just over $1 million. So 1084, I think it is. 1,084 in December of last year. And that's up 3.2%, and I think it's going to continue to climb, especially with interest rates coming down. So 20% down, that works out to $216,000 that you got to put down. And then you add on another $40,000 in land transfer taxes and closing costs, lawyer fees, any kind of adjustments, things like that. And then it works out to a monthly payment. So basically, if you put 20% down, $216,000, takes you 20 years to save that for the average person. And then that monthly payment works out to, okay, so if you're looking at an $870,000 mortgage, that gives you $5,193 a month for a monthly payment at 5.99% on a 30-year term. That works out to $62,000 and after-tax dollars. So you got to pay your taxes first, and then whatever money you have left over, that's what you're doing to pay your mortgage. That's kind of crazy for most people. Because if you work it backwards, the CMHC guidelines say that you need 39% of your gross annual income. Your mortgage payments can be no more than 39% of your gross annual income. And that's going to become a problem because if you work that backwards, that works out to $160,000. But then it's not only the mortgage payment, they got to factor in your taxes and maintenance fees, or if you have a condo, or even kind of heating as well too, and some other factors that they calculate as well too. But let's just say, just for argument's purposes, that just your mortgage is no more than 39%. Then you need $160,000 of a salary, gross annual income. And if you split that in two with a couple and you both make $80,000, like, how many people actually make that money, right? I mean, I'm talking about the average here, okay? I mean, some of you watching this might make more than that. Some of you probably don't. And that's okay. It's just the way it is, right? So you got that coupled with the increases of taxes, municipal taxes. We're looking at 10.5% increase this year, potentially, even up to 16.5%, like once the budget's finalized. We'll see what happens. Hopefully it doesn't happen. And then even if you're a tenant, for that matter, like those costs are going to get passed down to you. You know about the above guideline increases. If you have an extraordinary circumstance, meaning that your expenses, such as property taxes, go more than 50% of the allowable increase, which in 2024 is 2.5%. So basically 50% of that, which is what, 1.75%, plus the 2.5%, then that works out to 3.5%. Am I doing this math right? Yeah, 3.75%. So if you get tax increases at over 3.75%, which is bound to happen if it's 10%, then we can actually pass those costs down to the tenants as well too. So tenants aren't safe from this. But ultimately, the cost of carrying because of interest rates, the shrinking economy, so it means that potentially, there could be issues with employment even for that matter in the general public sense. You could potentially be laid off. It's going to get harder and harder and harder to qualify for housing. The cost of housing is going up. So I think more and more people are getting pushed into rental. And not to mention the speculation tax stuff. Anyway, let me get to that in a minute. But ultimately, I think that the cost of home ownership is getting really out of reach, and most people don't have access to buying a house anymore. and it's just going to be the way it is. So I think even though the immigration numbers are being capped, okay, let me get into that. So the reason why immigration, you heard in the news recently that the federal government just capped the number of student permits being allowed into this country in 2024. They capped it to 350,000. So they basically took 2023's number, which was 500,000 student permits, and they reduced it by 35% as the maximum amount of student permits being allowed into the country. Now, of course, that creates a whole ramification of other things, such as coffee shops and restaurants, servers and baristas and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of jobs that are pretty much geared towards students because no one wants to work that kind of amount of money. The typical fast food chain there's a lot of students working there, and that's going to be affected as well too. And I think the lower wage jobs that you get during school, if we get a decrease in student population, we might see an impact there. Students kind of feed into the first jobs. They kind of do the entry level jobs for the skilled workers. So if we see a shrinkage in that also has a bit of ramifications as well too. But ultimately, that's the decision. They're getting a lot of political pressure from the conservative group, which, he's doing a great thing, Pierre Poilievre. But anyway, he's pushing the Liberal government to make these reactionary policies just to get some votes back. And I think it's a bad thing. A lot of people were talking about tying immigration to housing, the amount of housing we have available, which kind of makes sense. But ultimately, I think that, Canada is a shrinking population just because of the aging demographics. And frankly, our GDP is really suffering. If you know anything about the economy, our measure of how well we're doing in the world is productivity. If our GDP numbers are positive, and not just GDP overall, it's GDP per capita. So that means that per person, you take the total amount of GDP out there, meaning that all the goods and services that get transacted throughout the year, you add it all up together, and then you divide it by the number of people into the country or that are living in the country. That's GDP per capita, and it's actually shrinking. So that means our quality of life is actually going down. That's not so good. But if we don't have immigration coming in, it's hard to find workers right now. I mean, if you talk to any large owners of companies or anything like that, they're going to tell you that it's hard to find good help right now because they just don't have it. And if you talk about the shortage of nurses and construction crew to build skilled trades and things like that to build houses, that's all shrinking. So I think the impact of capping immigration we're gonna see it in other ways, but I think we're in a more urgent need for affordable housing. And the argument of why tying immigration to housing, it just doesn't work, is because how do you even tie the two together, right? If you think about it, so in 2023, there was 225,000 housing starts throughout Canada altogether. Typically, we're about 250,000. The target's 250,000. And if you take 2.9% as the average household size, as per Stats Can, 225,000 times 2.9, I should say, 2.9, that works out to 652,000 homes that are needed, that we have capacity for. But meanwhile, we have 1 million people coming into the country, if not more. Just in Q3 last year, there's 430,000 people that came in. So how's that number work out? We have 500,000 permanent residents as a target for 2023 and 2024. And then on top of that, now you have 350,000 students. So that's 850,000. And then don't forget about the skilled workers, the temporary workers that are here. I don't know how many that's going to be. And then you have refugees and families of those people as well too. So last year we let in, ballpark around 1.2 million, ballpark around there. So that works out to about 3% of the population. We have 40 million people in the country right now. If we shrink that down to 1 million people, that works out to 2.5%. 1 million people, but we only have room for 652,000 people. We're still short. We're still short housing. And people aren't going to build housing for a variety of reasons. First of all, the carrying cost, the capital cost, the cost of capital is really high. Land is still high. And all I mentioned before about the cost of construction, cost of labor, the development charges, all the soft costs, all that stuff is really shrinking. That doesn't make the projects feasible. Meanwhile, the resale inventory market is available and much cheaper. That's probably why you're seeing bidding wars. And if you paid attention to any of the memes out there or any of the social medias from all the other realtors out there, you probably saw last week there was a bidding war for a townhouse in Mississauga, and they got 85 offers on a home. That's crazy. I've never seen 85 offers. The most I saw was probably about 40 or 50 in the peak season back in, I think, 2018, 2017, something like that, 2015. So 85 offers is crazy. Yes, the price didn't end up super, super high. It ended up, I think it was $1 million or something like that, and that pretty much works out to what the market value should be anyway. So it didn't go crazy over, but it's just a matter of time before bids start happening and pushing up the pricing of resale homes as the interest rates come down. Because right now, fixed rates are dropping, as we all know. The variable rate, the overnight rate isn't dropping yet, but the fixed rates are. And I think a lot of people are just, they need to move at the end of the day. And the starter home market is just on fire right now, as you may know. Some of the condo market is on fire as well too, but particularly like the townhouses, plus or minus $1 million or just a little bit under $1 million, for sure is going to be in a bidding war. So with the rising cost of home ownership and new construction isn't being built, I just think the rental market is going to kind of go on fire, and it's going to continue to go on fire. We had a little bit of a break throughout the Christmas holiday, the December holiday. But there was a report that just came out saying the national vacancy rates just dropped down to 1.5% in all of Canada. So nationally, like it used to be the GTA was around 1 or 2% vacancies. Then it got below 1% at some point. But, places like Newfoundland, and I'm not singling any of these countries out, or provinces out, I should say, or cities, but even like Halifax and like Calgary's been hot for a while, but things like PEI and all that, throughout all of Canada, we're seeing a 1.5% vacancy rate. So that means 98.5% of places are being rented out. That's very competitive, and it's hard to be a tenant right now. It's a 35-year low for vacancies. Throughout Canada, Urbanation just announced that the year-over-year increase was 8.6% for rental rates. And that's lower, yes, than the double-digit increases that we saw in the previous months or previous years. But yeah, the average price in the GTA in Toronto anyway is still $2,500 for a one bedroom and $3,150 for a two bedroom. That's pretty unaffordable, even though Toronto hasn't gone up that much. It's gone up by like 2 or 3% year over year. The rest of Canada is really heating up, probably because people are leaving Toronto, really. But I still think that all the jobs are in Toronto, so people still want to be here, and it's really hard to move out of it, right? If you need a job, and especially with all your friends and family here. So, despite the student population being shrunk by, or potentially shrunk, the international student population, I should say, by 35%. So the cap of 350,000 versus 500,000. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I don't think it's going to affect that much. I think the long-term effects of undersupplied housing is still catching up to us. Don't forget, it's been like 2 decades of this, right? Like we've had a shortage of housing for at least a decade and a half, if not 2. So we got to catch up to that. And then on top of that, even though we're capping the student population as a political move, that's what they're doing. I don't think it's actually going to make any impact to the market at all. At least not in the short term. In the long run, we're still heavily undersupplied, and I don't think it's going to get any better, especially as new construction isn't being built. So you tell me what that means for the rental market. If you're a landlord, hold on as long as possible. If you're looking to get into the market, in the long run, the fundamentals kind of make sense. Of course, this is not general advice I'm giving you. If you want to reach out to me and let's talk about your situation. I should say, don't be afraid to call me. I've had a number of you reach out, which is great, and book an appointment. Most of the times, you probably will get me if you click the appointment button below. At least we'll have a 15-minute conversation about your situation and where it's going to be. If you see me in the street, don't forget to stop me. Just stop me and just say hi. I think I'm approachable. I should be. I'm approachable. Okay, just approach me. But ultimately, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribing, make sure you do that, because otherwise you may never see me again. And I have a lot to talk about real estate. I've been doing this for 19 years, and I want to tell you about what's going to happen in the market, my thoughts on it. If you want to know about the thoughts on the market, I'm here to tell you. So in summary, I think in the long run, we're heavily undersupplied for rentals. The low-rise market is going to be crazy. The condo market right now is either flat or maybe shrinking. We'll see what happens with the low-rise market. And the trade-up and luxury market is slowly going to catch on fire once those other two segments kind of pick up as well too. And I think the Bank of Canada ultimately is scared to drop the rates because they know that things are going to go crazy. You remember what happened last spring, right? When this happened, when they had their third rate pause, or the first rate pause, I think it was. The market went on fire last spring. So I think that's kind of starting to happen now. And as soon as any kind of rate cuts happen, the buyer sentiment is just gonna go nuts, I think. As you're already seeing it now with the lower fixed rates, right? So yeah, let's see what happens. And I guess I'll catch you next week. Let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions about anything in real estate or just book an appointment and let's talk. Thanks for watching.